Thank you for sharing your celebrations. Today in celebration we had planned to write a common formative assessment in math. So let's check our pacing map. According to our pacing map, we've already given our math benchmark pretest C, so we should be on Unit 9. Unit 9 is fractions. How are we? Are you all about ready to start Unit 9?
I am.
I'm a little behind, but I'm close. So I promise I'll be able to finish it up and be ready for it by the end of this week.
All right, let's check our curriculum guide. Okay, according to our curriculum guide, this is Unit 9 is fractions, and it looks like we've already identified our essential learning as 3B. Recognize and generate simple equivalent fractions. Explain why the fractions are equivalent by using a visual fraction model. And I know when we determined this was our essential learning, that we recognized that the key concept here was to identify equivalent fractions, and that is really a basic skill that all of our kids need to know is equivalent fractions. But it's also important that they recognize and generate and be able to explain why and have that little greater depth and understanding of this essential learning.
More rigorous.
And I think, as I recall, when we chose this as our priority or essential standard, we thought that using that visual fraction model is really going to help build that base understanding in a really powerful way, so that it's not just looking at the numbers, but that they have a way to really think about and operationalize these fractions.
Yeah. Not only that, using a visual model is going to help our ELL students when we're looking at the lead-in and PSYOP strategies, so I think that will help as well.
I know the other thing we considered is that if they have a good understanding of this standard, then when they get next year to 4th grade, that they'll have a good base to build on for 4th grade curriculum. Okay, Byron, can you tell us a little bit about the data you brought?
Yes.
All right, as you remember, we decided to use our Acuity Math benchmark pretest C as our initial data points to help guide us in creating the common formative assessment today. We're using the Acuity Matrix school report, but because it includes all the students in our grade level who took the test. As you notice, 2 things. First, the green rectangles represent correct answers that our students chose. The second piece is that our pretest had 20 questions, and I condensed it down to include only those questions that were numbers, cents, and numbers and operations fractions, standard 3, which include the essential concept that we chose to focus on. Our essential concept here, 3B, as you notice, only 9 out of 79 of our students answered that correctly. So I think
we have some work to do.
Yeah, I think we correctly identified the concept we need to really work on, and that only represents 11% of our students answering correctly. The other thing that I would suggest is, as we write the common formative assessment, we consider 3A, because to me it looks more like a foundational skill that's going to help prepare our students to be successful in standard 3B and 3D as we come across. So that may be something we want to consider as we're writing our common formative assessment.
I think we can include a couple of questions for 3A. Okay, so we then have determined that our identified essential standard was 3B, but we needed the prerequisite skill of 3A to understand 2 fractions as equivalent. So let's really look at that standard. So as we think about questions we could write on a common formative assessment, how can we make sure that we are assessing what we're teaching and what the standard really wants us to teach?
Well, I think it's important to look at not only the verbs that they need to recognize and generate on their own, simple equivalent fractions, but also explaining why is a really big thing. And the way that they can explain why is through using that model. So that would be a really great way to teach them that reasoning skill that might be even a little bit higher level thinking as they have to explain why.
And I believe with A, as you look down at it, the use of the number line, I think, is also going to benefit them, because we're using a visual fraction model for B, but if we're also teaching the number line as well, that's two different models that we can show them, and that way they're not stuck just visualizing one and not being able to transfer that to other things.
Okay. I know we brought materials to reference today to give us some ideas of how questions maybe were worded or expectations. What did you bring with you, Roseanne?
Well, I looked in Go Math and I saw that there was a lot of emphasis on part to whole and also on just, laying that foundation, reminding them of what they learned in second grade about part to whole. And I also looked online at the state Core Academy materials, and they also emphasize part to whole, but also those fraction models. So I thought maybe as we start out designing it, it might be good to start with a part to whole and see if, for those students if they've even got that concept down.
Okay, so go ahead.
Well, I think too, if we stay with the bar model that's in Go Math, that's going to keep some continuity between what we're teaching in Go Math and what they're seeing on the CFA.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's look at the type of questions that might fit what we want to assess. We want them to be able to recognize or identify, but we also want them to think a little deeper about being able to explain why and to generate. So maybe we could do a matching for just being able to identify.
Yeah, I think with standard A, the matching or even multiple choice would be a good decision.
Mm-hmm. And then we'll have to do a performance assessment for the others.
Yes.
To really meet the standard, make sure it's aligned with the skills they need to know. Okay, so the teams decided on that, how they're going to address it. They came up with 4 questions for their CFA. One of them, I think you have a copy of what the assessments were that they created together. And the first one, is, as we talked about in our team, was going to be a multiple choice to see if they understood the part to whole and the idea of equality, that it needs to be equal shapes. So now they're going to talk about their proficiency level, where they're going to agree upon for grading purposes and also calendaring when they're going to give this assessment.
Okay, now that we've completed writing that conformative assessment, which took us a little time, but let's determine maybe how many points would be possible and how we will score proficiency on this. Okay, so how many points for number 1?
Well, it just has one answer, so of course that would just be the correct or not, so 1 point probably.
Okay. On number 2, we tried to make this look a little similar to what they may be getting on the stage with multiple answers. So there'll be more than one possible. What do you think on that one?
Well, it looks like they have to identify 3 correct answers, but then on the right-hand side, they're also having to model 3 fractions. So if we do 1 point for each, that would probably be 6 points just for question 2.
Okay, so that's 7. So we're up to a total of 15 points.
Yes.
What do you think would be acceptable for them to pass? To feel like we think that they have a good understanding of the standard?
I know with previous tests we've kind of started with 80%. Does that sound like a good mark to?
Yeah, and that would be easy because it'd be 12 out of 15.
Okay, so we all agreed
80%.
80%. All right. So looking back at our curriculum map, this was a 9-day unit, and so thinking about our calendars, what would be a good day for us to have time to teach this, but then give the assessment on the same day?
I think maybe about a week from now.
Okay, so a week from today, maybe next Wednesday, give the test, the assessment, this conformative assessment?
Next Wednesday sounds good, and then if everyone can give me their data, say by the end of Thursday, I can put it in a nice readable format so that we can go over it on Friday in our PLC time.
That sounds good.
Okay, that sounds good to everybody?
Yep.
All right, so then our next time we meet, we'll go over our conformative assessment data. We'll talk about instructional strategies that maybe worked for us and as we taught fractions, and then we'll talk about students that may need interventions or extensions depending on our data.
Sounds good.
Okay, thanks.
All right, thanks team.